Welcome to the Responsible Negotiation Podcast, produced by the DC Mediation and Dispute Resolution Institute. I am your host, Francis Ojok. Here at the Institute, we prevent, manage, resolve, and transform conflict into an opportunity for positive change using mediation and other appropriate dispute resolution mechanisms. Visit our website to learn more or contact us at info@dcmediationinstitute.com and let us know how we can work with you or collaborate with you. Without further ado, let's get to the show.
Good afternoon and welcome to today's book talk on behalf of the DC Mediation and Dispute Resolution. I'm Tina Patterson. I'll be serving as the moderator of today's conversation with Mariah Levinson and Rob Fursh, who are the authors of From Conflict to Convergence. There is a longer title, but I'm going to give you the shorter version of it. You are in for a treat. These are individuals who have amazing backgrounds, which I'm going to share with you briefly, and then we're going to delve in, ask some questions, and then there'll be an opportunity for Q&A from the audience. Let's start first with Mariah. Mariah Levinson serves as Convergence's CEO and president after serving as its chief program officer. Mariah uses a deep understanding of human relations to build trust and relationships across differences, which lead to consensus-building solutions to complex and contentious issues. Her work in consensus building includes assessments, design, facilitation, mediation, collaborative processes, dialogue, public engagement, best practices, restorative justice, and program development. Additionally, Mariah has been teaching these skills for 20 years in settings ranging from community training to training for foreign governments to teaching the mediation clinic at the University of Minnesota Law School. Prior to joining Convergence, Mariah helped to create and run the Minnesota State Office of Collaboration and Dispute Resolution. In that position, Mariah used a collaborative problem-solving process very similar to the one used by Convergence to build consensus on state, tribal, and local issues, built the capacity of government to work well across differences, and facilitated the Minnesota Legislative Civility Caucus. Before joining the state of Minnesota, Mariah worked for nonprofit dispute resolution centers in Chicago, New York, and Minneapolis. Mariah has a master's in international affairs with a focus on conflict management from Washington University in St. Louis. Welcome, Mariah.
Thank you.
As I mentioned, we also have with us today Rob Fursh, and I'm delighted to share with you also Rob's bio. Rob Fursh is the founder, senior advisor of Convergence Center for Policy Resolution, a nonprofit organization founded in 2009 to promote consensus solutions to issues of domestic and international importance. Immediately prior, Rob served as the United States Country Director for Search for Common Ground, an international conflict resolution organization. While at Search for Common Ground, he directed national policy consensus projects on healthcare coverage for the uninsured and U.S. Muslim relations. Between 1986 and 1998, Rob served as the president of the Food Research and Action Center, commonly known as FRAC, a leading NGO to alleviate hunger in the United States. Rob also served on the staffs of 3 congressional committees, including U.S. Representative Leon Panetta, Senators Patrick Leahy, and Senator Edmund Muskie. While a congressional staff member and at FRAC, he was deeply involved in shepherding the passage of bipartisan legislation to reduce hunger in the United States. Rob has held additional positions in the federal executive branch and nonprofit sector, and he was a 1994 recipient of the Prudential Foundation Prize for Nonprofit Leadership. Rob holds a law degree from Boston University and a bachelor's degree in industrial labor relations from Cornell University, where he has served as a guest lecturer and co-instructor of a course on collaborative decision-making and public policy. Again, welcome, Rob.
Thanks, Tina. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you as well. So in the interest of disclosure, Rob and I have actually met before, and we can talk about that a little later. But first and foremost, congratulations to both of you. I attended your book launch on July 30th, and This book has received rave reviews, and I'd like to start first with the question that all of us that want to ask. I know your new book is based largely on the work of Convergence Center for Policy Resolution, an organization that was founded in 2009. What is Convergence? And Rob, I'd love for you to share also, why did you start Convergence? And Mariah, I know you're going to chime in as well because you've been the program officer.
Well, thanks, Tina. Convergence is an organization that's dedicated to convening people whose disagreement stands in the way of progress. And my original vision was on big national issues, but we also work at the state level. And now increasingly, we're helping other people learn how to employ these skills in whatever areas of life apply to them in their own lives, in their communities, in their workplaces, and so on. I started Convergence because I had been involved in policy and politics in Washington for quite a while. I did work for 3 congressional committees, always bipartisan. But it struck me over time, especially when I was leading the anti-hunger group, that people with different points of view had no real place to sit down and get to know each other at a level where they could really communicate beyond debating the points they believed in. And as a mediator at heart, having studied mediation in college, in fact, I just felt there was a missing capacity certainly at the national level, but I think it applies elsewhere, where people could be skillfully convened and the best practices of conflict resolution and conflict transformation could be applied to the political arena, where it hadn't really been tested all that well. So based upon my experience of meeting so many people of great decency who wanted to solve problems but often disagreed with me, but added to my own knowledge and my own sense of experience on issues, I really felt a calling now 25 years ago to try to create an organization that would allow people to work together across differences, form relationships of trust, and despite continuing disagreements, get a lot done together. And Mariah, who's the current CEO, Mariah, maybe perhaps you want to add something about Convergence's role or its future role?
Well, maybe I'll just take the book angle on it, which is, Rob and I wrote the book primarily as practitioners, though both of us have some academic background in the work. We really wanted to have a story-driven book because we know that that's what's much more fun to read, and also is just a better, more engaging way to learn. So we're grateful to have been a part of so many important conversations on national and state level issues over the years, and then to be able to share those in a book. And then one of our big hopes for the book is that we can use our experience and the things that have worked well for us. And I think very likely for many people, listening to this podcast and engaged in the alternative dispute resolution field, to share those tools with more people at this time when it feels like there's a lot of demand for them. One thing that we're experiencing at Convergence is more and more institutions, partners, government entities saying it's feeling really tough to bring people together and to solve problems. And so we feel really honored and lucky to be able to share those via the book in addition to the organization.
Question for both of you. I'm curious, what do you believe is unique about the book from your perspectives?
Well, one of the things that I started touching on again was the story-driven approach. So we tell lots of different stories from both of our experience and from many of our colleague practitioners, and also try to draw on some models from history. We try to really balance that with a good mix of some of the science behind why we think these things work, because we know that foundation is important, but we tried to do that in a sort of brief and engaging way. And then to have really practical tools throughout the books. There are these try it out sections where we encourage people to, in the beginning of the book, think of a divisive issue in their workplace, community, at their kiddo's school, or a place where they worship, and be thinking about that issue throughout the book and trying to apply some of the learning. So we really wanted it to be very hands-on. I think our 2 big goals that Rob and I share for the book, one is to provide some hope to folks. There's such a strong narrative out there that we're, hopelessly divided, and we might as well all go home and dig deeper into our these silos that we increasingly live in and give up on problem solving. And it's while the times are challenging, it's just been our experience that we are able to reliably bring folks together, build trust, build relationships, and solve, or at least make some good progress on shared problems together. So we hope to provide that hope, but then also equip people with some tools. So we tried to strike that balance, and I hope that we got close to that.
I would just add, I agree with everything Mariah said per usual. that there's a lot of books out today about polarization, about how to build bridges amongst people, and they're great books. Many of them we cite in our own book. And of course, there's age-old information about how to do mediation, commercial mediation, and our work is closely related to that. But we're kind of filling a gap where our focus is on actual problem solving, where bridging relationships are really important, and that's as far as some books take it. And we love those books and love what they do and what other groups do. But what Convergence does and what this book is about is how do you use the improvement in your relationships with others you disagree with to actually solve concrete problems. And I think the huge benefit of actually doing that kind of work is that when people do engage in active problem solving, often the bonds they form even run deeper than just dialogue where you understand each other. You've been in a project together, and the evidence, the science says that yes, people tend to get bonded more deeply. So we think there are other books in the field, but we think we have a unique contribution based upon our experience on how to move people from not only tolerating and understanding each other, but to actually work together over time. And the other thing I'd simply say from our experience, and we're happy to tell stories, is that in many cases, people's relationships become so transformed that it's not just what happens in the room when they're working on a particular problem, but over time they stay friends or they stay colleagues and they work together differently and hear each other differently. So overall, we think we're contributing to lowering the polarization and differences in the country over time, not just for the period of time that we've convened people.
Are you ready to become the change you want to see in your community or in your workplace? If so, check out our tailored workshops and mediation skills, training and certification designed to equip you with the practical skills to become an effective conflict resolver and a certified mediation practitioner. Now, let's get back to the show.
That's phenomenal. I really like that. I'm going to pull the thread a little bit more about the uniqueness of the book. The book has 3 major parts that would be labeled as mindsets, building blocks, and process. Can you or would you provide an overview of each part? And Mariah, I'll start with you. I know Rob's going to chime in as well.
Again, given our audience today who has a background in dispute resolution, you all may be big fans of process as we are, but we thought, oh man, a lot of people probably don't want to read about the, sort of very detailed process that we run at Convergence and that I did at the state of Minnesota and other places. So we tried to really break down what we do that has led to these positive outcomes into chunks that would be applicable in a whole bunch of different situations, including when people didn't have the need or time or resources to have a really extensive process. So we started with what we call the collaborative problem solving mindsets, which we think are applicable in all settings, even when folks aren't, actively engaged in problem solving, but ways to think about and approach divisive issues. So, we talk first about conflict can be constructive. And what we have found to be true in our processes is that many people share the same high-level goals and values. And when we excavate that, then we recognize that we have some foundation for moving forward and that our differences are often more about how we achieve those shared goals and values. And that's a level of conflict that can be very constructive and can push our thinking to a higher level. And we talk about getting curious to dig deeper and understand the complexities of these issues, giving folks the benefit of the doubt. In today's world, that's getting a little tougher, but in my experience, very few people wake up in the morning thinking, how can I make the world a worse place today? Most people have a story about the things that they're doing that makes as much sense to them as ours does to us. So giving them that benefit of the doubt, getting curious about what that story is for them. And that helps us to build relationships, which are so foundational to the approach that we have used, so really centering relationships. And all of that ladders up to taking an approach where we're trying to, again, be able to reach these higher ground types of solutions in which we can achieve these shared goals without compromising our principles, because we've taken this approach and we're able to meet the needs of more people. So that's our mindset part of the book. And then we have building blocks, which are just some key actions that leaders and in any institution, community, and the public can take things about really learning about the issue in more depth, taking time to build trust, taking time to really dig more into the nuances of who the stakeholders are and the complexities of these issues. And it doesn't sound so exciting, but you heard me say there multiple times, taking time. And it's a surprising part of things in my experience, is just dedicating some more time to some of these issues can be a really powerful piece. And then the last section is on process. So Rob, do you want to pick up there and share a little bit about what's in the process section?
Sure. Yeah, thanks, Mariah. Well, the process section has three major areas, which is how do you sort of prepare well, what we call discovery and design, and then the actual conducting of the dialogue, and what we call dialogue and destinations. How do you facilitate and get people to find common ground, or what we call higher ground, which is where everyone's mutual needs are being met. And then lastly, how do you achieve consensus and how create an impact? I was on in an interview the other day, and the clever interviewer said, basically, I see these three sections of the book as why, what, and how. And that's, I think, a good way to look at it. It's not exactly perfect, but the mindset set the foundation not only for why you would want to be a collaborative leader or a collaborative problem solver, but those mindsets help you be more effective. The building blocks are the fundamentals, no matter what, whether it's just a dispute, even in your family or your place of business or in your community. It doesn't have to be some big involved public policy work, which Ron and I've done a lot of. So it's about, all these elements, building trust and hearing people well and keeping attention to how do you satisfy each other's needs. Those are all fundamental, staying curious, and so on. And then the processes will depend upon how complex the situation is. Is it a big public policy issue with people from around the country gathering every 3 months, or is it something that you can meet weekly in your community on, as long as you have the basics of how to convene the right people, pick the right topics you want to address, and engage them in a way that can be constructive and lead to really not otherwise possible results by getting people whose disagreement stands in the way of progress, getting them in the room and pushing each other's thinking to a higher level.
I like that, the how, the what, and the why. But let's talk about the who. Who are you trying to reach with the book? And who would you regard, or who would you consider your primary audiences?
I can start, and hopefully Mariah will fill in for whatever I've missed. We had a choice in the beginning whether to make this a very specialized book or to try to go much broader. And the more we thought about it, even though we were warned not to try to be all things to all people, we realized that the lessons that we have in the book are broadly applicable. So people who are business leaders or coach business leaders have told us these ideas work. Academic leaders, even professors, are using some of these ideas in their classes already. Community leaders, and Mariah's done work at the community and the national and the state level before coming to Convergence, where she now leads our work so effectively at all levels. So we're trying to reach really people who have issues dealing with conflict and difference at any point in their lives, whether it's in their personal lives, their professional lives, their public lives, and trying to, as Mariah said earlier, inspire and equip them to be collaborative problem solvers. Of course, we'd love to get public officials very much involved, people at the county level, state level, city level, national level, because there's an outsized impact when policy leaders begin to engage in a way that's truly collaborative. And I would say, despite all the talk about pulling the country together, and people on the Republican side and Democratic side have called for that over the years. My experience, and of course I did work for 3 congressional committees and the executive branch nationally, is that many people have that intention, but don't necessarily have the skills and the experience to be able to do that effectively. So it's meant to be sort of a playbook on how to do that. And we hope that people in all walks of life, in all different settings, will find the ideas here useful. And the amount of the book that they use may depend on their circumstances, but the goal is to broadly create a much more collaborative society. And one of our goals, frankly, is that if these ideas get taken to scale, maybe we can contribute to a lessening of the political polarization and the divisions that run so rampant in our society today.
Very good. So, Mariah, what do you hope would be the major takeaways for those who read the book?
The biggest picture message that we hope people will take away from this book is that while we have some real challenges in front of us today, we aren't as hopelessly divided as it seems when we, watch the news and just sort of hear that narrative that's out there. It's not that there aren't reasons for that, but what a lot of polling shows is that while people feel divided, they also think it's really important to have conversations, to work on our differences. They want to find common ground. And that is absolutely our experience at Convergence. And importantly, that people are able to come together and reliably, find that they not only have more in common than they thought, but that, their differences can be a source of strength, that they can work through them and come up with solutions that don't compromise their principles, but maybe even help develop these higher ground solutions that are wiser and more durable than anything they could have come up with on their own. So that's the big picture. We want people not to give up on each other, not to give up on problem solving, to recognize that there are, steps and processes that help people reliably to come together, to be in positive relationship together, and to solve their shared problems in a way that leads to wise and durable solutions.
And Tina, I would just say, again, Mariah said it all. I think to ground this for your audience, of course, these are people primarily who already are into the field of conflict resolution. We tell so many stories, and I've got several favorite ones, but, one I would mention today, for instance, is we did work on K through 12 education starting many years ago. And we had participants who probably didn't think they could even talk to each other before they came in the room, but as one woman said, I came in the room really to protect my interests. I didn't want to leave it to teachers' unions. She was a critic of teachers' unions. And it was sort of unforeseeable that she might even work collaboratively with teachers' unions. She was the head of a conservative foundation, had been a critic of the teachers' unions, very much in favor of school choice and bringing more computer technology into classrooms. She thought unions were resisting it. But by the time the process was over, she and at that point, the vice president of the National Education Association, Becky Pringle, now is the president of the NEA, the largest teachers union and largest union in the country, had become dear colleagues and good friends, even went on a speaking engagement together. And as part of that group, issued a report which broke new ground on how we could transform K through 12 education. And the group has now actually spun off from Convergence to form their own organization, Education Reimagined, where they're taking their ideas out around the country, mainly from the grassroots up, to try to present a new notion of what they call learner-centered education. So while the two people I mentioned, Giselle Huff, who was the critic of teachers unions, and Becky Pringle, continue to disagree on school choice and all sorts of issues, they found some very important insights they agreed on about what could make learning more effective for young people, whether it's in public schools, private schools, charter schools, and they're putting those ideas out into the world. So that's just an inkling of what we think people can take away, that that even in situations where people seem unalterably opposed, where they are reluctant to talk to each other, you can build bonds of understanding and empathy for each other's life stories and begin to understand each other. And then even if you don't agree on everything, it doesn't mean you disagree on everything. You can find very important areas to make progress on important issues. In our case, in many cases, national issues, but it's a proven methodology, as I've said before, to be used in all different kinds of settings.
Fantastic. Mariah, do you have an example you'd like to share? Rob, that one is very eye-opening. I thank you for sharing that. Mariah, do you have one you'd like to share as well?
Sure. One example that I think is a really good illustration of the type of higher ground solutions that we talk a lot about in the book was some work that I did at the Minnesota State Capitol a number of years ago. The Capitol underwent the first renovation since it was built in the 1850s, and it was around the time when there was a lot of talk about representation in public art and who is represented and who isn't, and what stories are told and what stories aren't told. And so a conversation started about the art that was in the Capitol, which, other than the governor's portraits, which, there was a new one every year, nothing had really been updated since the 1850s. So you can imagine that a lot of stories of Minnesota history, depictions of Minnesotans were missing since that time. And so the topic became contentious. And so I was brought in to help lead an effort to build consensus around what art in the renovated Capitol should look like. So in particular, there was a lot of concern about two paintings that were in the governor's reception room. And that it was important because in the governor's reception room, it's really ornate. And by the way, well, it's a different governor now, but the current governor of Minnesota is someone who might be on folks' minds these days because his name is Tim Walz. So in his current office, we'll see where he ends up. It's a very ornate setting, and there's not a lot of room to put panels and do things around interpretation of art. And right in the spot where governors give their press conferences and hold important meetings, there's a very big painting called the Treaty of Traverse des Sioux, which depicts the signing of a treaty that led to the ceding of a lot of land in Minnesota and other parts of the upper Midwest, and a treaty for which, as happened in the case of many treaties, many promises were broken. The treaty was misinterpreted and not fulfilled, and it led to the U.S. Dakota War and then subsequently the largest mass hanging in U.S. history. So, a really difficult time in Minnesota history. And some folks were saying, leave it where it is. It's a part of the history. We have to deal with these difficult things. And other people were saying, take it out of there. It's not accurate. It's painful. It depicts Native Minnesotans in ways that are not accurate or respectful. And we had this sort of, we're stuck, leave it there, take it out. And so the process that I was able to be a part of leading helped both this committee of folks, and then also through listening sessions and engagement across the state, people come to a shared vision that they wanted art in the Minnesota State Capitol to be both unifying. They said the Capitol is the people's house, and so art there should make people feel welcoming and affirmed, but also that a purpose of art is to engage in difficult topics. And everyone on kind of all sides of the issue thought, we don't also want to avoid the hard stuff. We want to use art to help us grapple with that. And so they created a vision statement as well that said the art should tell all of these different kinds of stories about government and history and peoples and landscape. And they use that shared vision, which is a part of almost all of the processes that both Rob and I have been a part of, to then generate some higher ground solutions. So one of the things that they did was they moved, there was another painting in that room that depicted Native Minnesotans. They moved those two paintings to a separate spot in the Capitol, a newly renovated spot where they were able to put these lovely etched glass panels describing the process that Minnesotans went through to make this decision and those guiding principles and visions. And it also has the faces of many Minnesotans with their understanding and thinking about history and art in the Capitol. And there was also a decision made and legislation passed to create a permanent committee that would bring in all different kinds of art that told all different kinds of stories. So I like that story because it illustrates how even on some of our really divisive issues, there are paths forward and that lead to these really creative kinds of higher ground solutions that aren't, yes or no, but really trying to meet a lot of needs of a lot of stakeholders to an issue.
I'm going to pull that thread just a little bit because both of you have shared examples where compromise was involved. And sometimes people feel that compromise is not something that they should be involved in, especially when we're talking about, as you both have indicated, higher ground solutions. So what would you say to people who feel that trying to find common ground or even higher ground solutions inherently compromises their quest for social justice or efforts to improve the world?
So I would say, we think compromise is a great thing and think it's not great for our society that people are not feeling good about it. But we don't think that people should be compromising their values and their principles. If people value justice and fairness and kindness, if they have principles around freedom and choice, and those are all really important things in our society, and we don't want to be compromising those things. And so, all of the things in the book and all of our work is about, developing these mindsets, taking these approaches, going through these steps, leading people not to having to compromise their values or principles, but coming up with solutions that are these higher ground solutions that don't compromise values and principles. Are there compromises in how we get there along the way? Sometimes that is a part of it. But I think when the process works really well, people feel like this is a meaningful improvement at a minimum on where we are, and at a maximum feel like this is actually a wiser and certainly a more durable solution than that either or type of solution where we started. I'm sure Rob will have more wise things to say about that. It's an important point.
I've been called a wise guy, so maybe perhaps I'll chime in a little bit. Yeah, I again totally agree there that some people view any kind of compromise as a dirty word, and I think it's a matter of degree. But I think what I'd say in answer to that question, which is timely and important, we do get it, is that, first of all, not everybody can necessarily participate. We try to get the widest range of difference of opinion. And not everybody has to be all excited about coming to the table to begin with. In fact, Giselle Huff said point blank, she only came to the table because she's afraid what would happen. She didn't think anything good would come of it. She didn't really believe in talk to begin with, and then she became a convert. So first, there are some people who are either so dishonest or so tied to identity politics or so biased about other people that it's hard to reach them. But by and large, when we get people to the table, most people are well-intentioned, as Mariah said before, and we create a culture in the room where they get to understand each other. And what I'd say to you, and this is from other experts in the field, including international people work on international violent conflict resolution, is that there's an opportunity to transform the conflict when you bring people into the room. That in fact, as long as you can find a shared goal, even if you disagree very strongly on how to get there, it creates an opportunity to create wiser, more durable answers. So it doesn't leave people spoiling for a fight afterward. So I would say to people, and I was very much involved in what I call social justice work, running a national anti-hunger group, that there should be no really gap between pursuing your goals and also listening to other people and potentially have other people add to your ideas. And if you can find solutions that work for virtually everybody, then everybody wins. And you don't necessarily have to compromise anything important to get that done. Our experience in Convergence shows over and over again that people can come up with ideas that they're actually excited about, enthused about. It may not be 100% of what they wanted to begin with, but as long as they don't feel compromised by the solution and feel that it is a much better solution, in some cases even better than what they thought to begin with, then you have an opportunity to really move important issues forward, no matter where you stand on the political spectrum and no matter how you define social justice.
Are you ready to become the change you want to see in your community or in your workplace? If so, check out our tailored workshops and mediation skills, training and certifications designed to equip you with the practical skills to become an effective conflict resolver and a certified mediation practitioner. Now, let's get back to the show.
Wow. I'm just sitting here soaking this up. This has been a rich conversation. I think, and I promised at the beginning that we would talk about how Rob and I met, but I'm going to hold that after I ask this next question, which is regarding the idea regarding compromise and in this time in which we live, where there's a lot of focus on polarization and increasing polarization, everything from where our children go to school to where we build, to the water or the resources that are available and who has access. I'm curious for both of you, how does this increased focus on polarization affect your work? And how can what you advocate, collaborative problem solving, contribute to less divided workplaces, communities, and national politics? How is this ongoing conversation regarding polarization impacting you in this space? And what do you see as a way forward?
You know, one of the things when you say the conversation, and people ask me for a long time, is your work getting harder given the increased polarization? For a long time, I said, not really. Still, I bring people together and it feels like, not that it's not hard work, but reliably, again, people find that they like, respect, are interested in each other more than they think and find ways to work together. It has, I think, in the last few years gotten harder. And there's a lot of reasons for that. There's a lot of, structural drivers for our division, the way that the media has changed, growing inequality, increased immigration, the way that primaries take place. There's all kinds of stuff that's, sort of beyond my expertise. But I think that the reason that it feels a little bit harder, the reason to me that is the most fundamental and most important, is that people are feeling more fearful for a whole bunch of different reasons. And that when we feel like we might not be able to take care of our families and our communities and the people around us, then we more easily fall into these kind of us versus them dynamics and feel that it's zero sum and one person's gain is another person or group's loss. And so I think that one of the real powers of collaborative problem solving in this moment is to demonstrate on real and divisive issues that there really are ways forward that integrate and meet a really wide array of needs for folks. So I think sometimes when we look at an issue, we're looking at who's doing okay right now. And as we're trying to, put some folks into the boat who, have not historically been there so much, we get into fears about, well, is there going to be enough to go around? And are we going to have to throw some people out of the boat? But really what we're trying to do is build a bigger boat. And that sounds nice in theory, but what I think collaborative problem solving has in some ways the most to benefit our country and our world at this moment is to have real examples to show, yes, in fact, it is actually possible to build a bigger boat. It is possible to solve problems in a way that actually meet more needs of more people instead of getting into kind of competitive us versus them, who wins, who loses.
I'll jump in and just say, I almost always agree with Mariah, and we do hear that the polarization that's very much present at the national level seeps into local levels and can affect who wants to talk to each other, and certain narratives take hold in a way that's dangerous, whether it's from charismatic national leaders or social media or media outlets left or right that tend to shade the truth toward what they shade their coverage to what they think is the truth, and so on. So I'd say, that definitely an issue. On the other hand, people have always had huge disagreements. When I worked on the Hill in the 80s, you know, business and labor and all sorts of people were at odds with each other. And, our experience is that these people were just as divided as whatever polarization is doing to each other. One quick example, we did a project on what we called working up, how to improve economic mobility for low-income people in the United States through work. And we convened a table, of course, of people who normally would disagree on how to increase economic mobility. They all agreed on the goal that people should be better off and have opportunity to succeed. But we had two people at the table who were, at the beginning, we thought, oh my God, it could be fireworks. One was a woman who worked for an organization advocating for workers, an employment law project. And she had been a critic of Walmart for decades, I believe. Had vowed never to go to Bentonville, Arkansas, where Walmart is headquartered, and felt like they were the enemy. They were not a good employer. I don't know if she ever used those words, but I'm putting those words in her mouth. She also is a lovely, reasonable, open-minded person. Her name is Judy Conti, and of course, we had Walmart at the table, and we had a senior executive, Ellie Bertani, from there. There was skepticism and shoulders, hunched, and defensiveness about it. And of course, by the time they got done working together, Ellie had taken a whole bunch of ideas from that process, called it the best, most stimulating thing she'd been part of since grad school. And then a few months later, when she invited all the participants in our project to come to Bentonville for some big conference they're having, Judy went down to Bentonville. And when we brought them in to speak about their experience to the Convergence Network, they basically retold that story. And then one of them said, well, I was really angry and upset with the other until I met Ellie, or until I met Jude. I forgot which one said it. And then they got up and hugged each other. They'd become friends and colleagues and respected each other and found wide areas they could work on together. So these are people who thought perhaps they were unalterably opposed, and which is what polarization does to people. You begin to generalize people, you begin to stereotype them, you begin to sell them short, you don't give them the benefit of the doubt. But it's an age-old human problem. And we think our methodology not only applied in the past, but also applies in these much more polarized times. And I think the other benefit, which I mentioned before, is that the more people do this in all sorts of settings and all sorts of places, we think it can be part of the antidote, not the only answer, but part of the antidote to polarization, that the more people who do things together get to know each other, form some indelible relationships, especially when it's people can see high-level people doing this. I think it sends a message to the larger society that there's another way of operating besides just I win and you lose.
You mentioned the past, and at the start of this conversation, I indicated that Rob has actually met me before, and I want to pull the thread on that just a little bit. So Rob met me in 2021, and at that time, I was serving as the editor for the American Bar Association section for dispute resolutions, public dispute and consensus building newsletter. It's called Just Resolutions. And Rob authored an article titled Hope and Help for Collaborative Approaches to Divisive Issues. The article was well received and many people gave positive feedback. I'm curious, Rob, that was 2021, and here we are with the rollout of this book that has been co-authored. What, from your perspective, has changed, if any, since writing the article? And what message do you see that runs from the article to the book?
Well, that's a great question, Tina. And of course, when I wrote the article, I had perfect knowledge of the future, and there's no reason to have to change the article whatsoever. The world basically stopped and listened to what I had to say in the article. So everything we say now is totally the same and relevant. I don't know the answer to that. I think mostly what I just said tongue in cheek is true, that what was true in 2021 is largely true now. I mean, I do think it's important to know that there's a burgeoning number of groups led by people of Republican and Democratic backgrounds, and this has grown enormously even since 2021. We're working to bring the country together, building bridges and talking to each other differently and understanding each other. And the more people get involved in that, the better. And that's part of the purpose of the book, is to inspire more and more people to take these approaches in all sorts of ways, especially in politics and in policy, but also, as I said, in workplaces and businesses and nonprofits. All the troubles now on the university campuses. Mariah is very active, happening already. One university in Convergence wants to build this out, get a level of dialogue and understanding going amongst young people. So I don't know if there's anything dramatic that occurs to me. Maybe Mariah has some thoughts about that. I think that article was a precursor to the book. The book embellishes it, fleshes it out. It brings all the great intellectual knowledge that Mariah carries on top of my own experience. I like to think of myself as a reflective practitioner, but I don't have the same academic grounding that Mariah has, and she's brought tremendous knowledge and science on top of her experience to this. So I think that article remains relevant, and obviously, we got to be ready, and we try to write a book that can be versatile to expand to address challenges as they arise, new challenges as they arise. And it may be at some point, we'll have to write a sequel if things change enough that our approach needs to be modified.
Are you ready to become the change you want to see in your community or in your workplace? If so, check out our tailored workshops and mediation skills, training and certifications designed to equip you with the practical skills to become an effective conflict resolver and a certified mediation practitioner. Now, let's get back to the show.
Very good. If you haven't seen the book, check it out. I want to share with you a comment that I saw. This is actually feedback about the book. The writer wrote, "This book is the handbook for bringing us together on seemingly intractable differences and polarities. Their process is so clear and so immediately applicable. Anyone," and this was capitalized, anyone, "can use their methods to overcome new and old conflicts at work, at home, and in our communities and nation, and really the world. If only everyone had a copy and used it, our world would dramatically change." That is a stellar write-up, but it also says a lot about the applicability of this book. And when I think about this book, I think about books like Difficult Conversations, which I have a copy of and I recommend to people often. And I think also of books like Getting to Yes, which I also have a copy of and received many moons ago when I started out as a dispute resolution practitioner. I'm curious, is there anything that you would like to share with the audience that I haven't covered in terms of a question before we move forward to closing comment?
Well, I would say the book does draw very much on both of those two books you named, which are absolutely two of my favorite books. And given that we're here with the ADR community today, and myself having started as, a mediator in many of the ways the two of you on the call have shared, working in communities, working in schools, working in courts, and then moving on to work on local and state policy and now national policy. I know at this time where so many folks are feeling stuck on moving difficult issues forward, I think there's a wonderful opportunity for folks in our field to apply some of the core skills, which I think, most mediators and other people in the field already have, and just adding some of these more extensive process steps and public dimensions around them. So Convergence is eager to be a partner to anyone who wants to help, do more problem solving out there in the world. So the book is a piece of that effort. We also have an e-learning program coming out, and as a part of our learning lab, we connect with other leaders and communities and institutions to help them apply this methodology. So I would encourage folks to check out Convergence's website as well as the book. And if you're interested in getting more involved and building more tools and capacities around providing these services, or you're aware of a conflict, where someone might benefit from having some more support to apply some collaborative problem solving methodologies, we welcome connecting with folks and always look forward to that.
Thanks, Tina. I would add a couple of thoughts here. First, this e-learning that's coming out is going to be quite comprehensive about how to do these processes. And it was actually prompted by a request from dear friends of ours who are mediators. Bruce Edwards, who used to chair the organization JAMS, and his wife Susan have a Edwards Mediation Academy. And they said, there's a missing piece. We do all this training on mediation, and yet related to this is your work, which, and I've read a lot that Bruce has written. He's the mediator business. Susan is more the business person helping to run the academy. They're very, he's very people oriented in how he does mediation. I'm sure each of you are experienced mediators, have your own approach. So, but he said to us, really, there's a hunger for this. And part of the reason why we're putting together this training program and wrote the book is we hope mediators will find it useful. Maybe it's a corollary. They may already know how to do this kind of work, or they may get some new ideas how to do it more effectively. And some people are hungering for this, both in the US and around the world. How do we bring people together more on sort of public kinds of issues or community issues beyond sort of the normal commercial disputes? So I would say we hope that you will find this of use. We would love it if you think there are other audiences that you know of where we could reach people and tell them about the book or get them engaged. And of course, we'd love anyone on this, listening to this, to look at Convergence and get involved with us. We're always looking for new people to contribute ideas, to serve on our leadership council, potentially serve on our board. We're an organization that is small but mighty, and we think we've got ideas that are good for the times, and especially once perhaps we get past a very contentious election. People are going to really focus on how can we come together. And so we need all the allies and all the brain power of people like the people on this call to help us move our mission forward. And we also stand ready to help others move their mission forward through our training and our education, our book, and our any kind of consulting that we do. So that would be an invitation to those listening to get involved with us or help us take the word out further and farther than we've done so far.
Thank you. That is just lovely. The opportunity to partner, to collaborate, the other C, which most of us in this space are very much aware of. As we wrap up the session, I'm curious, and this will closing comment from you. What's next? What if you had a crystal ball and you could look 5 years into the future? Where would we be, knowing that we have utilized many of the lessons learned and suggestions from your book, from conflict to convergence, coming together to solve tough problems? Where are we 5 years from now, using your crystal ball?
Sadly, I don't think that I have a crystal ball, but I will tell you one thing that I say all the time, which is that I think Rob said somewhere earlier in the meeting that we're never that good at resolving our differences. It's a big focus right now, but historically we just suppressed a lot of difference and didn't let a lot of different voices into conversations. And so I don't think we've ever been all that good at it. And one silver lining from this moment that I hope comes to fruition is that there are more books. I'm sure our book got published because of this moment, and ours is not the only one. There are so many other good books coming out right now about our divided times and how to understand them and come together. So many organizations. Convergence has been around for 15 years. I'm sure the DC Mediation and Dispute Resolution Institute has been around for just as long or longer, but there are many new organizations that we have the privilege of working with. There's so much more research on these topics. And so my hope really is that we learn how to do something better that we were never that good at, to work across difference, to build understanding, to work through these differences and find solutions that meet more needs of more people. And I have reasons to be hopeful of that in spite of, the very real challenges that we're facing. So that's what I hope the crystal ball would show, is that we do learn those lessons, we build more capacity, we understand each other better, we center our relationships, and we learn how to solve our shared problems together more effectively. We'll see, but we're doing what we can on our end and look forward to working with all of you as a part of that.
No, I'd say it's more what I hope the crystal ball will show than what I expect it will show. But this is the vision. The vision is a society that actually works to solve problems more effectively and builds bonds of community and friendship in the process. That increasingly people in all sorts of sectors begin to internalize that they can, for them to win, other people don't necessarily have to lose, that they want to be inclusive, they want to engage with people in a positive way. They don't want to sweep any differences under the rug. That'll come back to bite you, but to really understand each other and go deep. And if my dream would be in 5 years, we have more and more political leaders, business leaders, community leaders, academic leaders, all beginning to practice this. And it spreads like wildfire, that young people inspired by this vision that there doesn't have to be, a divide between, social justice and getting along with other people. There doesn't have to be a divide along political lines in a way that prevents people from hearing each other and being friends with each other and working together and living together. The larger vision would be that these ideas, I'm sure to be perfected and improved upon by many other people, take hold in a way that becomes the predominant culture, that we look more to collaboration and contentiousness as a way to solve problems. At least we do it as a first resort. And we use the skills that have already been developed and proven over the years to do so in a way that's not being done now. Most people are still new to these ideas. They don't live in this world. They're used to clashing and arguing and debating the points. And, when we gather people in a room, we never start debating the issues. We always spend a lot of time building trust and understanding and shared values and that sort of thing. So in my crystal ball, we could have, what George H.W. Bush called a kinder and gentler nation that also is hard-nosed about solving problems, because these ideas are not for naive and for people. It's not just about being polite or nice. They're really hard-headed ways to get things done, and in the process build enormous social capital of goodwill across people who have differences.
Both of you, the future seems bright, and thank you. And speaking of goodwill, I want to thank DC Mediation and Dispute Resolution Institute for being the host today for today's talk. I want to thank Mariah and Rob for taking time from their busy schedule to meet with us to talk about this book. And for those of you that see this recording in the future, I want to thank you for taking the time to listen. I hope that you are inspired, that you've gained some insight, and also hope, which is underlying this entire conversation, hope that we can work together to have a peaceful future. And with that, have a great day.
Thank you for listening. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. You can support us by leaving a 5-star review. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to this podcast to stay informed whenever we upload a new episode. See you in the next episode.